One. All right, today on the latest episode of The Big Show, it's fall and we are officially in award season. This week, we'll discuss several new releases that may be in the conversation later this year. Wilson Morales and I are back from the Toronto International Film Festival, and we'll take a brief look back at some of the big titles you should look forward to. Charles Kirkland, of course, joins us as well. We'll have all that and more on episode 508 of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. Let's go. All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. For whatever reason, Wilson Morales literally just disappeared as we're coming on the air. Charles Kirkland, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing better than Wilson. At least my internet is working.
Hey, man. You know, it's been a minute since we've done shows, and we've had a really, really busy summer, man. So it was good to get the team back together. I'm assuming at some point, internet bearing that Wilson will be back, hopefully. So how have you been doing, Charles? You good?
Well, like I said, I'm doing all right. I didn't get to go to Toronto like some people did, but that was more on my side, I guess, than anybody else's. But so,
Right.
but that's just the start of the season. So we still got some other film festivals that are coming up that I hope to be part of.
All right, Wilson. So welcome
Wilson's back.
sir. And
well, I guess my Wi-Fi was short-lived. I had to get on phone now.
So Wilson, you know, we were talking about coming back from Toronto. I had a list of titles that kind of stood out to me. Was there anything that you saw that really stood out to you, like 4 or 5 films?
I'm going to have to excuse me for a second because I have a knock at the door. This is the worst timing. Give me one.
No problem. Excuse yourself. So while Wilson excuses himself because he has a knock on the door, I will just say, Charles, that several of the films that stood out to me that people will look at a little later on this year, of course, were Glass Onion, Knives Out, which is the sequel to Knives Out from 2019. The film The Inspection, which really kind of hit close to home for me, about a closeted gay man who goes into the Marine Corps. It's a really well.
Please tell them that it's close to you because you were in the Marines.
I was in the Marine Corps, and a lot of the film is about the basic training. Chevalier, which of course is Kelvin Harrison Jr. stepping out in the title role in that film. Jordan Peele and Keegan-Michael Key, the reunion of Key and Peele and Wendell and Wild, I thought was a wild story. That was a lot of fun. Brendan Fraser's The Whale, which we're going to talk a lot about when that movie's about to come out. And of course, Jonathan Major's film Devotion were the ones that literally jumped out to me that I saw. I will say, as it relates to Devotion, I probably need to see it again. And I don't know if I had this conversation with Wilson while we were in Toronto, that I saw that movie right after I saw The Whale. So the Whale is such an emotionally charged film that the next film that came after it may have suffered a little because I was still on a whale high. But I probably need to see Devotion again. But The Whale is really, really good. That was my favorite film in Toronto. What about you, Wilson?
The Woman King was one of my favorites out there. It's a good commercial pleaser. I like The Fabelmans. I didn't love it. I like The Fabelmans. The Whale had a good performance. I wouldn't say the film is great, but I had a good performance from Brendan Fraser. Sidney is a good documentary. I like The Blackening to some extent. You know, nice little horror comedy featuring a good cast of Black comedians that you haven't seen in a film in a long time. You know, sometimes you get one comedian and you fill them up with the rest of, dramatic actors. This one has a bunch of comedians in there. Chevalier is a good period piece, solid, there has some little flaws, but it's solid. It's a good vehicle for Kelvin Harrison. What I would say is this year had a lot more films directed by Black talent than ever before, 22 to my number, and I'm not even counting the short films. And so there were a lot of product out there in which showcased even Tyler Perry's film. You know, like for an audience who probably don't watch the Medea films, they were introduced to him seeing a Jazzman Blues, which was a decent film. And so now the question is, can he follow it up, you know, and doing something different? Otherwise, if he goes to back, and Tyler owes no one anything. He doesn't know. He doesn't have to. You know, he's got his own studio. He's obviously not looking for anybody to bankroll his films. He can do that. He's achieved a lot. But I would like for him to take things like, okay, you just did a Jazzman Blues. Can you do something similar? Otherwise, if you go back to doing like a Medea, it kind of like defeats the purpose.
I agree. And we're going to be reviewing a Jazzman's Blues, Sidney, and On the Come Up on today's show. So, you know, so that was really interesting. That's why I didn't bring those three up. Now, as it relates to The Woman King, we didn't get a chance to talk about that last week. You and I were both at the premiere of that film about a week ago.
I was too.
No, we were at the premiere of the film with the cast. You saw the movie at the same time. Different experience.
Where'd you see yours, on the Fire Stick?
No, man. They had screenings around.
They screened it everywhere at the same time.
So, but yeah, The Woman King is an amazing film, man. And it was funny because I was having a conversation about our awards. I mean, I know Wilson is an Oscarologist that just happens to do our show, but we were having a conversation around the Black Reel Awards, and as strong as I thought Tyler Perry's film was, I just think it's a bad year for him because there's Black Panther 2, there's The Woman King, there's Nope, that I know that are in line ahead of it.
Well, there are a number of other films as well. You're talking commercial films. I'm sure there's a number of other small films we haven't talked about yet. You know, that's probably could come into the conversation. A lot of it's all about visibility and marketing. To, you know, that we're mentioning the bigger name films. Right. And so, like, yeah, those are going to stand out. You know, like even now, like, you know, you have stuff that's on Netflix that doesn't get much fanfare. You know, films out there. They're like, oh, okay. You know, like you just had a film with Queen Latifah and Ludacris, directed by Millicent Shelton. You know, you never know that if they were treated differently, you know, they could be in a conversation. But no, you know.
Wilson, just keep looking at me, shaking my head like it's not. You know, I mean, I love Millicent Shelton, and I'm sure she tried hard, and I'm sure that Queen Latifah and Ludacris did their thing. I don't know, but thank you, Wilson. That was good. I like you. Hot for Jesus, Save Your Soul is another one. I Want to Dance with Somebody. Inspection, Devotion. There are several movies that are coming, but and we will talk a little bit about those in the ensuing weeks. But today, specifically on the come up, Sidney and the Jazzman's Blues, we want to definitely spotlight those films. But before we get there, Wilson, is there anything else going on in entertainment we need to know
about? You know, you've got the New York Film Festival coming up. You've got New York Comic-Con coming up. You know, we're entering the end of September. And so now you're starting to get a lot of the heavyweight dramatic films that people want to consider. No more foolery. And so there's a lot more, you know, there's a lot more out there. Nevertheless, there's a lot of TV shows out there as well. You know, we're having the start of the fall season. So there's a lot of Black talent out there. Some of them that do TV, some of them that do film. So, you know, we've got a glut in the market in which there's a lot of options out there. So as you always like to say at the end of the show, maybe see something Black. I don't know how to, I can only paraphrase what you say, but you know, there's a lot of things out there. It's about how well you can market your product, whether it's good or bad, to let people know and give them an awareness. Sidney's out on Apple. Like I think it's in theaters, not on Apple TV yet.
All right. We're getting ready to get to that. But before we move forward, Wilson, can you do me a favor? To your left, there's a piece of a green box you just got in the mail. Can you push your box out the way, man, so we don't have to see your box?
Are you hating on a box, Gordon? Come on, man. All the stuff that you got in the background, you're going to talk about a box?
He's going to complain about my box. Look at the stuff behind him.
Y'all,
you know,
more.
Man. All right.
He got some regular shirt on. I changed my shirt. You got some old, let me wake up, put this on.
What are you talking about, man? I am wearing a shirt from a festival that I run. Like, can I live? Like, wow.
Self-promotion.
It is self-promotion. It's my show.
Yeah, but the festival's over. I can see if it was coming up.
It is over, but I want to make sure that people stay in the mindset of LFF. So, having said that, speaking of festivals, the first film I want to talk about today would have been a film that probably would have been good at a festival, is Sanaa Lathan's directorial debut on The Come Up. And of course, this film tells the story of a 16-year-old girl by the name of Bree who wants to be one of the greatest rappers of all time. Facing controversies and with an eviction notice staring down her family, Bree doesn't just want to make it, she must make it. This film, of course, stars newcomer Jamila Gray, Sanaa Lathan, Method Man, Divine Randolph, and Mike Epps round out the cast up on The Come Up. Normally, we would have a clip for you, but I'm not going to clip it. I'm just going to throw it to Wilson Morales. Wilson, what did you think about Sanaa Lathan's directorial debut, a film that I described probably as a female 8 Mile light?
You can kind of call that right. You know, I happen to see Sanaa Lathan's evolution, obviously, from when she did Blade and then The Best Man and other films after that. I happened to catch the first film she did, which is a short film that premiered at Tribeca 2 years ago or so. And now, obviously, this is her feature directorial debut. And so, but at the same time, I'm not expecting her to go from doing her first film to we talk about, awards. Sometimes people have those misgivings when you go to festivals that every movie is an awards contender, and it's not. But it gives you that visibility. And it is like a light female 8 Mile because there's some similarities there. And I thought it was a decent job. I think this is based on the book by Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate You Give, which turned into a movie. And Kay Oyegun, if I'm saying her name correct, who's one of the writers.
Oyegun.
Okay.
Oyegun,
who's one of the writers on NBC's This Is Us, adapted a screenplay for this. And I think she did a good job because when I spoke to Angie, she said this, obviously the dialogue is different, but the dialogue here is fresh, it's timely. Jamila Gray, it's a good standout for her. I want to see her next performance to see what can be made out of her. But I thought that Divine Joy Randolph was amazing in this movie. I think the story, it's, when you compare it to 8 Mile, for those who saw it back then or may have seen it on TV, there's some similarities there. And it's a question of whether or not how authentic any of this stuff is from based on a city. People are always going to say, well, they don't do this here. I don't remember what city this was based on.
It's not based on any city. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but go ahead. We'll talk about that because that to me is
but as far as her direction, it's fine. It's like, listen, you want to do something like take it slow. Let's see where you go to next. Sometimes, it's hard if you try to come out the gate and try to do something big, and then there's a lot of pressure on you if you try to do like a true story and stuff like that. And there's a lot of directors who don't go there yet because they rather get their feet wet and then start swimming before they're ready to jump into a bigger pond. And so right now she's getting her feet wet, and that's what I appreciate.
Well, I tell you this much, man, before I get started, man, I just for people who watch this show, Kay Oyegun, who's on This Is Us, is somebody who I know very well and I count as a friend. So I almost have to say that before we get started. Sanaa Lathan, it's so funny because the day before I saw this film, Wilson, I went to the Woman King breakfast and I was talking to Gina Prince Bythewood, and I was like, it's amazing that the star of your first film is actually directing, making her directorial debut this year in Toronto. And she was like, yeah. So she was there. We saw it together. And I think the thing that was interesting to me about watching this film is that when you start the story off with "This is Any Place USA," I'm like, uh-oh. I don't like Any Place USA stories. Just take the...
That could be worked out.
No, you said it worked out?
No, I'm saying that way, you don't have anybody from any particular city saying that's not how we do things here.
Yeah, but I thought that that was kind of one of the flaws because the story feels almost like a fairy tale or disconnected from reality when you put me in Any Place USA. Like when I watched Meteor Man back in the day, that was Any Place USA. When I just saw what was the Sylvester Stallone film, The Samaritan,
The
Grass
Samaritan,
City,
yeah.
like come on, man, like
Well,
this is a comic book.
you can't throw those films with this
Okay,
movie. You know,
well, I'm just
I mean,
saying that that's
if
what I
you
get
set it up
when
that
you give
way,
me, huh?
Tim, I
I
think you
was
lost
gonna
your
say,
lighting.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say,
it's
if you
coming
set
back,
it
man.
up
It
that
goes in and out,
way,
man. Don't even trip on it. But I don't like Any Place USA kind of stories. Give me, base the film on something. Give me something substantial that I can hold on to. Root me in a world where I can watch your movie. That if you're telling me a serious story, don't make it seem like it's a fairy tale. It's a film, right? So we take the story, which we've sort of kind of seen before 100 times, that the father was a famous rapper. He left tragically, and now the daughter wants to follow in the father's footsteps. Another flaw I had with the film is that unlike Halle Berry in films like Bruise or in Monsters Ball, where you take somebody who's really, really attractive, even Monster with Charlize Theron, and you kind of make them up and make them look a little unattractive. Sanaa Lathan was the finest heroin addict I've ever seen. There was no, so I'm looking at the film in that aspect. And again, I'm nitpicking. I will admit I'm nitpicking, but these were things, Wilson, early on that took me out of the story because I was like, really? Really,
She
Sanaa?
wasn't.
Like, Wilson, am I wrong? Am I wrong when I say that? Like, if you are a
Yes, you are,
person who's an
because
addict,
she wasn't. She was a heroin addict, but that doesn't mean like, hey, she still had kids who kind of kept her clean a little bit. So it wasn't. I remember by the time we're into the movie, she's an ex heroin addict. So
she's an ex-heroin addict, but even when she was going through her period, when we see that in a flashback situation, like, come on, man. So again, let's get to the story because I'm nitpicking. So
yeah.
we get to the story. I've seen this before with 8 Mile. Here's a kid who comes out the first time, gets shook, goes away, comes back, finds her bars. She finds that she has a bigger thing that she's rapped for. Now, what I will say, Wilson, is that for all of the shade that I'm throwing this movie, the last 10, 15 minutes, I thought that was great. I almost welled up and cried at the end because when you see the emotion that Gray exhibits in that final arc, that was great. But on a whole, it was okay. I call it 8 Mile light with estrogen. It was good. Would I watch it again? Probably. But I would give it a C plus, man. I didn't think it was anything special. When you said it was a solid debut for Sanaa Lathan, it probably is a solid debut. I would love to see where she goes next with her filmmaking. So that's my take. What about you, Wilson? What did you think? I'm talking about from a grade standpoint because I've already gotten
from a grade standpoint, I'd give it a B minus. I'd give it a B minus. I wouldn't give it a C. Like I said, it's solid. People can sit back and enjoy and see, like, okay, and in a way, you mentioned out flaws. That only helps her out. Otherwise, if you would have said this was an A plus movie, then there's the pressure on the next one for her to be just as good, and that's what happens. Then when you have certain people like a Jordan Peele who comes out with an A plus will Get Out, and then the next one, you're expecting them to be on that level. The minute he drops down, as all of a sudden the naysayers come out. Like whether or not this was a fluke. Whereas you think about there's certain other directors who started off, and let's say, and I'm going to use him as an example before we move on to the next film. I think about Malcolm Lee. He did The Best Man, did very well with that. His next film was Undercover Brother. And throughout the years until Girls Trip, he was kind of like coasting, like whether they were like this, Soul Man didn't do as well. Scary Movie 5 didn't do as well. But then he does Girls Trip, and and it's like, okay, but he was never like well low. Whereas you have Tyler Perry, and if you're a Medea fan, you've been enjoying him. If you're not a Medea fan, you're like, he's been so low that anything he does better is only just a little bit of a bar up. So like with Sanaa's movie, if she's gonna be middle of the road, that's good because now she's hearing what you have to say. I'm sure she's going to be reading what's out there. That's going to help her out on her next project. You know, she's going to have a team. And like I said, she said herself during the premiere, she was calling Gina up, you know, like, oh, you know, editing, do I need to do this? You know, it's your first time at the gate, you know,
Right.
stepping up to the plate and behind the scenes. So like, hey, you know, it's not always easy. It's not like she went to the DGA school, took a break from acting, you know.
All right.
So
Okay,
I like to think of it like Deion Taylor. If you want to think about the come up, if you want to talk about, you got to have a point where you start and you grow from there. And for Sanaa, this is a good growing point. I to myself, I think this movie is more like Patty Cakes than 8 Mile, in that you have the female rapper who's struggling to break through. So in the description, because I just didn't have the opportunity to go to Toronto and actually see the film, but everything people are telling me, I think of it in that vein.
All right. All right. Well, let's move on to our next film. And this one, of course, was near and dear to my heart as well. And of course, we're talking about Sidney. Historians and film experts honor the legendary Sidney Poitier and his legacy as an iconic actor, filmmaker, and activist at the center of Hollywood and the civil rights movement. Denzel Washington, Halle Berry, Morgan Freeman, Robert Redford, Barbara Streisand, Spike Lee, Louis Gossett Jr., Oprah Winfrey, who also produced, Harry Belafonte, and Quincy Jones appear in this film, directed by Reggie Hudlin. And Wilson, let me start off on this one, man. This was one of the films that was one that I really, really wanted to see. And of course, knowing so much about Poitier's life, to me, the treat of watching this, even if you know a lot about his life, was that you get to hear it in its own words. And I think this was footage that they used from Oprah Winfrey's masterclass that Sidney Poitier did probably several years before he passed. It was also great to a lot of the names that I mentioned earlier, to hear them acknowledge what Sidney Poitier represented and meant to them. You know, when you talk about Denzel Washington and Halle Berry and some of these other Oscar winners that were on there, Louis Gossett Jr., who worked with Poitier early in his career. It's a fascinating portrait of a man. And there were several, I think there were a couple of things, or the one thing that I think I picked up that I didn't know before, Wilson, was the relationship between him and Harry Belafonte. That like these two, like a married couple, man, where sometimes they communicate, sometimes they don't. They get back together. I thought that part of the film, to me, was equally fascinating. What did you think about the film, Wilson?
you know, I have like maybe 2 decades under you, but I think that I think it was a good film. You know, like I like you know, I didn't see for you know, I don't know Sidney's first film, and I don't think I was around during his first film. Yeah, but nevertheless,
Neither
I thought
was
it was an
I.
extraordinary. Yeah, I thought it was an extraordinary documentary, considering the fact that he died earlier this year, and the timing is right for people to find out who this man was, and that he was a flawed man, you know, but he was on screen. He was the best out there at the time. He represented greatness. He represented the race, the people, in terms of elegance, you know, on screen, you know, and there's certain roles he did not want to take. And then when you saw him on screen, he was just powerful, you know. You saw, you know, I think back when he accepted the award and you think about that time frame, he got his award. And unlike now, where if somebody gets on, you know, somebody black wins, they're going to say something, oh, you know, it's been a long time. We needed it. So he was pretty much elegant, you know, said a speech, thank you, and walked off. You know, he could have said, oh, especially when he was the first black actor to win. And to see at some point where he started the production company with Paul Newman and Barbara Streisand, I was not aware of that. Obviously, when you look about his personal life, you know, with Diane Carroll, I didn't know the extent of that. So people are going to get some insight into his story. And so it's a good story for him. You know, there's a lot of documentaries that we see every year. It's probably a little bit more compelling. You know, this is basically a story about this individual right now, and its timing is right. And I hope people get to see this in theaters as opposed to on Apple, because this is more than just a documentary about Sidney. I really hope people get to see this on the big screen, because I think when you play it on cable, whether it's Apple, Netflix, or Hulu, you don't really get a sense of like, I'm dying to watch it, because their attitude in your mind is going to be, I'll get to it at some point. And so like when you have it in the theaters, in your mind, you say to yourself, it's not going to be there forever. I want to see it now.
Well, I think the part, and Charles, I'm gonna throw it to you in a second, but I think the other thing that I got from watching the film, and I always knew it because I've studied this man's life, like ad nauseum, but the enormous responsibility that Sidney Poitier had, man. I mean, Wilson talks about, the story being compelling. I mean, think about all these other actors that understood that Sidney Poitier not just had his career in the palm of his hand, but he had the entire Black race that he had to contend with. So when Wilson talked about there were certain roles he wouldn't take, I think the one, because now that's something I didn't know. They had a piece in the doc where they talked about Poitier was offered, I forget the role, but James Edwards wound up taking it, and it was a subservient role, and he was like, his parents wouldn't, he was saying in his own words that it's not a role that his mother or father would have been comfortable watching him do, so he didn't feel like he should do it. And he was very, very cognizant, not just of who he was, but what he represented at that time. And I think that Reggie Hudlin, along with Oprah Winfrey, who, as I said earlier, is one of the producers or the producer on this film, they took lots of pains to make sure that there were certain messages about Poitier's career or certain aspects of his career that they wanted the public to know. And I think for that reason, Wilson and Charles, I think it probably becomes to me the definitive version of this man's story, because there are probably going to be other documentaries made about Sidney Poitier, but it's going to be hard to get one with the breadth of all of the different people that were in it, the breadth of different opinions, the different looks at his life, his wife, his children. It's an amazing piece of masterwork from Reggie Hudlin on this.
Yeah, I just don't see how you can do another documentary without looking at this and say, okay. And remember, you also want to get the blessing of the family, and the family like, we gave everything to Oprah. What is left?
Pretty much.
Like what is left? Like what's left today? Unless you take a little slice of his life and you focus on that, and like, yo, we saw it all, And when Sidney's talking on camera, I'm like, yo, how do you beat that? He narrates his own documentary.
The only thing I really wanted them to hit that they didn't hit, well, two things actually, is I wanted to hear the Porgy and Bess famous story, because we've been told that when he took the Defiant Ones, as a part of that, it was a package deal that he had to do Porgy and Bess. He didn't want to do Porgy and Bess, and the relationship of him having to defend Dorothy Dandridge from Otto Preminger. So that's a really good story, which that wasn't touched in the film. And then I think they did touch it, Wilson, where they talked about from 1967 to about 1971, he was like the biggest thing, but then the world changed. And then by the time 1972 comes, Sidney Poitier becomes an entirely different actor. He's no longer that big box office draw. He takes more of a backseat role in films like Buck and the Preacher or Uptown Saturday Night, and a lot of the other films that he made moving forward. So I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of frame his career, that up until a certain point, he was as hot as fish grease. And then after that, he just became a really solid actor in a basketball term, who turned into a point guard and was like, an assist for you, an assist for you. I'll make this $100 million movie here. That's who Sidney Poitier was. But Charles, I know you didn't see the doc, but knowing what you know about Poitier's life, and what you've heard Wilson and I talking about the doc, what are your overall thoughts?
To Wilson's point, I agree that this is probably going to be the seminal story about Sidney Poitier, because after, there may be others that come along, but there won't be anything left to really tell. There are a couple stories here and there that may come up, But I think this is going to be the one that everybody's going to look to and say, "This I've really found out about Sidney Poitier from this film." I am disappointed that knowing Tim Gordon, that I did not get an opportunity to see this film. I'm sure that you could have called Reginald Hudlin or somebody and said, "Hey man, let me see this film." But it just didn't happen for us that way. I don't know. I don't know. Light Reel Film Festival. What's up? What's up? Anyway,
it's like Tim didn't make that call. He said
he
him
didn't
and
make the
Reginald go
call.
like this. Like,
It's just he let me down, dude. You let me down. So, but Sidney, I mean, we've discussed a lot about Sidney Poitier on this show and privately, and yeah, when you talk about the regality of him as he's playing all these roles, and then that switch came in '72 when I mean, we even talked about Sidney Poitier in Uptown Saturday Night was a garbage man. I'm like, that doesn't really fit. He didn't even look like a garbage man, but for the purposes of the movie, that's what he was, and he still played it with an elegance that just maybe like Charles Dutton may have been the next best garbage man that we ever seen after that. So, but I can't wait to see it, and I kind of disagree with Wilson about the Apple TV thing. I mean, I think it's going to make it available to a whole lot more people than who would see it on the screen, because not many people pay money to go see a doc on television on the big screen. When they
true, but
when
just
pay for a
but
movie, you want to
not
be
everybody got Apple TV.
that's true.
On a side note, tonight's Yankee game against Boston's on Apple TV, and there's already complaints about like who's going to watch this game.
That's true.
Well, all I will say in closing, man, is that he has a singular career that will never be repeated, because again, you can never be the first again, right? So not only was he the first, but he was the first who did it at such a high level, talking about No Way Out, talking about, and it's funny because Wilson always talks about how old I am. Wilson and I are less than like 10 years apart, right? So Wilson is in the same neighborhood. I don't want people at home thinking that Wilson is like this super young guy, because Wilson is not a super
I
young
am 38 to 42.
Wilson has been a journalist
Pick
for
one.
like
Pick
30,
one in there.
almost 30 years,
Hey.
25 to 30 years. So if you were a baby doing journalism, you would be Wilson Morales right now.
My room is like Benjamin Button. When I come out, it's a new era.
So I'm gonna let Wilson tell that story, but I say all that to say that Sidney Poitier's films, I know a lot of them play on Turner Classic Movies. You could see, I think his big period would probably been the emergence in the 1950s when he was doing stuff like No Way Out, Black Boy Jungle, A Man Called Hawk, the film The Edge of the City, the one he did, which also didn't get talked about in the doc, the Nick Cassavetes film that he did, The Defiant Ones in 1958, Raisin in the Sun, 1961, as well as Paris Blues. They did hit, Lilies of the Field, which has never been one of my favorite films from Sidney Poitier. And
but he won.
In the doc, I was making faces. I was like,
but he won.
Yeah, he won, which goes back to what an Oscar really means. Because what he should have won for, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, 1961, Raisin in the Sun. He had 3 huge films.
He didn't even get nominated for
Didn't get nominated for any of them. In the Heat of the Night, To Sell with Love, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And I will also say that slap that they talked about from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, we saw that slap in the next film that we're about to talk about. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is a Guess Who's Coming to Dinner homage in the Jazzman's Blues. Remember that scene, Wilson? With the slap? I take it from Wilson kind of trying to process and think about it.
Trying to remember that scene. I'm like,
yeah, man. But so I was just thinking about all the homages, but I will end by saying that I think this is an A+ documentary for Reginald Hudlin, because I think it is the definitive one of Sidney Poitier's life, and he narrates and tells his own story with his family, with all the luminaries that are in this. You got Robert Redford, Barbara Streisand. Wilson, you didn't know about First Artist with him, Paul Newman, and when they did their company in the late 60s, early 70s?
I wasn't born yet. Okay.
Okay.
By the time I knew, it's kind of funny because it's not like you see, maybe by the time you think about it, Sneakers came out in 1992, and I was still, I think it's probably still in school. That I'm sure anybody who wrote about that movie would have talked about how this is the first time they're acting together in a project since they probably, started this project 20 years earlier.
Okay.
So
okay. I'm gonna let Wilson.
And in fairness, Tim, not everybody is as well read and knowledgeable about Sidney Poitier as you are. So I'm not going to fault.
Hey, I can't argue with a guy who went to school with him.
Let me say this, right, and this is, and I love Wilson Morales. I mean, God, as they said in The Color Purple, I loves Wilson Morales. God knows I do.
But
Wilson, okay, I'm gonna say it really slow and I'm gonna say it low, which really I want to draw the audience in. You run Black Film and Television.com.
Yeah.
There is no individual in the 20th or 21st century bigger than Sidney Poitier. You, Wilson Morales, should know everything there should be to know about this man. You should. And Paul Robeson.
Well, there's there's a difference between watching movies and knowing his films than knowing stuff that he did 30 years ago. At the end of the day, we know Denzel Washington. Do we know every project he's probably given money to or so forth?
No, I know every project Denzel Washington's done.
No, but I'm saying, do we know all of the films that Spike Lee has executive produced? Sometimes there are a lot of things that we didn't, it's like
we do. You do.
I know a good portion, but there's some films out there that don't know all the films out there that he executive produced. Let's not go there.
Do you know every film Spike Lee's directed?
By time, every what?
Every film he's directed.
Yeah, I'm saying directed, but I'm talking about executive produced.
Okay.
Not directed.
Okay.
Movies that he's put his name on, in the last 20, 30 years. And there's a bunch of them that we know a majority of them. But not
I can name them for you if you want me to. I know Spike Lee's career like I know Poitier's career. Spike Lee is the greatest Black director and probably the most important Black director who has lived outside of Oscar Micheaux. I mean, we have these conversations all the time. None of this stuff is new. But that's why I said I love Wilson Morales. Wilson Morales,
I know,
is a North Star for me.
The funny thing is, I don't compare myself. I try to say this. Listen, I don't compare myself to everybody. I think we're all different. There's no one thing is I'm better than you or so forth. But we each have an attribute that makes ourselves, unique. And so like you do what you do, and you've seen certain projects that I haven't seen that makes you much more astute as to what you're talking about as of Sidney. I haven't. And
great.
And
you called him.
We're gonna have to end soon at some point because I just blew off a big time publicist. I'm gonna have to return that call, otherwise it's not gonna look good.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, we got 15 minutes left. I still love Wilson Morales dearly, and our last film is the 23rd film from Tyler Perry. It is simply called The Jazzman's Blues, which is a tale of forbidden love and drama, family drama that unravels over 40 years of secrets and lies in the Deep South. This film was written, produced, and directed by Tyler Perry, probably done out of his studio. And it stars Joshua Boone, Amiri Vaughn, Saleha Pfeiffer, Austin Scott, and Ryan Eagle. And I'm going to lead off, Wilson, because I want to say something on this show the audience has never heard me say before. Never had in 507 previous episodes. Have you ever heard me say what I'm about to say right now? I was in Toronto with Wilson Morales, and I think, did you go to the premiere of this film?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, I was at the premiere, right? Tyler Perry comes out, he brings out the cast, he talks about the film, and he talked about this being his magnus opus, right? You know, this is the film that he wrote. He ran into August Wilson one night. August Wilson called him, you know, said, you know, what you should do, go home and write. He went home and he wrote this screenplay. He put it in a drawer. 27 years later, he pulled it out and decided he wanted to make it. And I remember having this conversation in Toronto where this film, I watched it. And when I was watching it, I kept, you know, I compared it to a baseball game, right? So if you think about a pitcher who pitches and like every time you watch him pitch, he gets around the fourth, fifth inning. He has a bad outing, a bunch of runs scored, and you got to get that pitcher out the game. That's been to me Tyler Perry his entire career. I've never seen him pitch a complete game where he started off, finished the game, and finished it strong until I saw a Jazzman's Blues. I'm sitting there and I'm watching it and I'm waiting for it to exhibit the things that I've seen in Tyler Perry's movies, where the screenplay gets off kilter. I see some bad cinematography and wigs. I hear dialogue that makes no sense. I'm waiting for all of that. And guess what? I got to the end and I went, he did it. He actually made a complete movie. A Jazzman's Blues is the best film Tyler Perry's ever made to me. It is really good.
To you.
To me, it's the first one I've really enjoyed from start to finish. And I read a review someplace, and I would agree with this name. It reminded me of a Douglas Sirk film, right? So people at home going, who the hell is Douglas Sirk? Douglas Sirk is a director who would make these films in the 1950s that were these melodramatic women's stories, stuff like Imitation of Life, The Magnificent Obsession. You know, these films that kind of glorify love, unrequited. This film is his Douglas Sirk production. It is perfect. If you remember Far From Home a couple of years or several years ago, remember that?
Far From Heaven.
Far From Heaven, excuse me. Thank you, Far From Home. Far From Heaven, thank you, Wilson. This film plays just like one of those films, but the black version. I thought it was, I'm not going to say it's not like The Godfather, but to watch Tyler Perry make this movie, write, direct, and produce it. And to me, it is so different from anything else he has done previous to this. I was shocked, Wilson. I really was. I was like, wow. And then I watched it again because I said maybe it was because I was in Toronto. I watched it again and was like, pretty good movie. Pretty good movie. So what do you think? What are you thinking, Wilson?
I wasn't shocked. You know, Tyler says he's had this script ready to go since 1995. And here he is.
Wilson, stop. You weren't shocked? You thought that Tyler Perry had been making really competent films for the last 20
Well, I'm saying that like he wrote this script in 1995, and you think back then he was a nobody, you know, and back then I'm sure, you know, we didn't have the studios, or no, we didn't have the independent labels as we have now, and it was pretty much a studio-led system. And him being an unknown and probably not having the weight of, you know, of knowing the right people and trying to get put on, and I'm sure the studios are like, this is not going to make us any money. You know, you look back to 1995, unless it was a commercial film, nobody was giving money out like that. So he, you know, he put that on the back burner, you know, created Medea, took off with Medea, you know, and that's what happens whether you are a director or an actor, that when you do a certain type of project that all of a sudden you become known for, they want you to stay in that lane. You go back to Eddie Murphy, you know, that when he would become successful, and Reginald Hudlin said that nobody wanted him to do, what was the movie? 1992, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? No, Eddie Murphy and Reginald Hudlin. Boomerang.
Oh, no, they did Boomerang. Yeah, they did Boomerang.
Yeah. Reginald Hudlin said nobody wanted Eddie Murphy to make Boomerang. They wanted him to stay in a certain lane. to be the funny guy, not the romantic guy, just keep being funny. That's what's making us money. And so when you think of Tyler Perry and the success he's had with bringing Medea from stage to screen, and you got to deal with Lionsgate. You think back to not just you think about Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was very successful as a comedian. Then when he nobody wanted him to make the Andy Kaufman movie, because they're like, oh, and they actually told him, like, if you make this movie, we can't pay you your $20 million rate. And that's how it is in business. We can't pay. You're going to get paid far less because we don't think that's going to bring in the dollars that you've been normally bringing to us. So with Tyler Perry, once he became successful, then he had a little bit more power as far as what he can do, which is why he was able to do what's it called? What's the one with the woman? The Color? What's
the one that he did with Janet Jackson?
Yeah,
and all of those guys. Yeah, what was it called?
Everybody. For Color Girl, that's a tough project to make, as we know, on stage and on screen. And he was able to do it because he was in a certain power structure. I go back to my conversation with Barry Jenkins, and he said he made Beale Street Could Talk because he knew there was a difficult book to adapt. Yeah. Nobody wanted to do it. But after he won Moonlight, he felt a little bit of power. And he goes, this is what I want to do now, before he loses that power. And the people above him could say, no, we don't want to do this.
That's a good point. So all those now, are good points, Wilson. That's a good point.
So now, he does a Jazzman Blues. And I've always believed he can do this. So the question, as I mentioned earlier, is, he brought this to Toronto for an audience that probably has not seen Medea. They're now being reintroduced to you because they saw this movie. I saw it at a public screening, not the P&I. Mm-hmm. And it was crowded. It was mostly a white folk audience. And they were entertained by this movie. They kind of saw it because, as you mentioned, anybody old enough would probably say this is very similar to a Douglas Sirk movie. If they're old enough. If not, they'll remember the Julianne Moore film. You can kind of see where it's going. We've seen this probably in some episodes on TV, and then you could probably name a couple of films that this brings to light. And so, like, you saw where it was going, and I wouldn't say it's complete. It's his good film, but I'm like, am I shocked? No. I think he had it in him. It's a question of whether or not he wants to follow in this trajectory. It's like when we see Eddie Murphy do Dreamgirls, and people like to say that he did not get the Oscars because the following thing he did was Norbit. And I remember when Adam Sandler was being almost nominated for what was that movie?
Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems. And I saw an article in the Hollywood Reporter from an anonymous Oscar voter said he was good in it, but I don't want him going back and doing some silly stuff. Right. And you think back to Robin Williams. I always think comedians make the best actors. And
I agree.
So when you think about Robin Williams and how funny he is, but then he does Good Awakenings. No, he does Awakenings.
Awakenings.
Good Morning Vietnam. Good Morning Vietnam. And then he does Good Will Hunting, and then all of a sudden, the Academy gives him an Oscar. Is when you start showing that you can do these type of projects, and become a little bit consistent. But Tyler's in his own, but Tyler controls what he does, which is why he's the anomaly, because he doesn't need anybody to tell him what to do. I'm going to do what I want to do, whether you like it or not, and you can go back to that one episode that he had in the Kenya Barrett series as far as why he does what he does.
Right. Yep. Yeah, he explained it. You're right. Yep. So look, I would say this much, right? That, I challenge the fact that you're not shocked, because if you've shown me you can do something 22 times and you have a pattern of doing something, and when you step outside that pattern and you do something different, I'm surprised. So maybe shocked is the wrong word. Surprised was the word. But I just want to say publicly, man, Wilson is like, I knew he had it in him. I didn't know he had it in him because he had never shown it to me in 22 previous films. But I'm glad he has it in him And in case you're listening, Mr. Perry, kudos to you, sir. Like I said, not to say that you got to please me, but I'm just saying I represent a group of people who are cinephiles who are rooting for people who look like us to make films that I think we can stand behind and be proud of. And just like we talk about a Black Panther, a Woman King, we talk about so many other stories and so many other storytellers / filmmakers. Wilson, all we're asking for are films that we can get behind and root. So you heard us earlier talking about Sanaa Lathan's film. You know, this is her first time out the box, and we're anxious to see where she's going. We've got films coming up with Ryan Coogler later this year. We've got films coming up, and we have some films coming up with a lot of first timers. But these films show promise. But at the end of the day, to your point, and you're absolutely correct in Tyler Perry's defense, that it is about money. It's about dollars and cents. It's not just about, I'm going to make this really good movie, because Moonlight didn't make any money. It won the Oscar. It didn't make any money. Tyler Perry, all of his movies have made more than Moonlight made. Would that be accurate, Wilson?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty much.
We're going to have to let you go for soon because I'm getting
Wilson has to make a phone call bad.
No, like I'm hearing from there are different publicists hitting me up and they're like, we need an answer. We need an answer. And I'm like,
Wilson
okay.
got to go bad. All right.
Yeah.
Wilson,
Well, only because I have to step out in about a half hour to go see a screening. You know,
bruh, I know, and we're almost about to wrap up, man. So, Charles, any last words today as it relates to any of these heard? Because I know you didn't see any of these movies, man. But any last words before we get out of here?
I don't want to hold Wilson up, but I agree with him. And this was my theory that I was going to intimate to you before. When you make a movie like A Jazzman's Blues as your first film, it sets you on a certain course of action. And if he get found the financing or whatever to make that movie, he's a prestige filmmaker. And so it's hard to become a commercial filmmaker, which is what Tyler Perry is. His films are bankable. And because of his successful creation of what he's done with the Medea franchise, he has the largest studio in Atlanta now, and which gives him the power to do something like A Jazzman's Blues and whatever else he has of prestige nature in his gun. He's got bullets now he can fire on his own. Nobody can tell him, oh, you can't shoot that shot, because he can now. He can do it. And so that's the reason. And he's a very intelligent man. So when in the beginning, he says, am I going to go for broke and successful or rich and successful? I'm like, I can be rich and successful and come back and do that project that I really love doing. And when I told you that this was his first screenplay, you're like, nah, he's done a whole lot of stuff. I was like, no, this is the bullet he's been holding in his gun for a long time. And he's got more. He's got more.
So, Wilson, what would you give this film, man, a grade? What grade would you give?
I'll give it a B. I'll give it a B.
I would go one better. I'd give it a B+.
Okay.
I really enjoyed this film. And it's on now. It's in theaters now, and will it be on Netflix next week, or are they doing a same time and day?
I did not look that up yet.
First, and then Netflix.
So it's in theaters this week and on Netflix next week.
Right.
On the come up is on. Are they doing the sound? So I've got to ask these questions now, because all of these streaming platforms that sometimes are doing these day of. So I know is it on Peacock today and in theaters today, or is it both? Does anybody know that answer? Because I didn't look.
I would have to look it up.
And then finally, for Sidney, you're saying that's definitely in theaters today, and then,
I think so. Yeah, I saw it on a poster in theaters September 23rd.
Wow, this is an interesting story. So we may have 3 films that are directly in theaters and then will be on streaming platforms this time next week. Interesting. All right. So I just want to say, first of all, welcome back to everybody, because it's been a couple of months. It's been a minute since we had Wilson on. Wilson, I know, is going to be at the New York Film Festival next week, so we will not have him, but we will have a Wilson sit-in until we get Wilson back. And as I tell you guys every week, in closing, this is what Wilson was trying to quote earlier. Please see something good at the movies. we have given you 3 really interesting options. If it were me, Jazzman's Blues and Sidney, you got to go in there and check it out. And then if you got some time, sneak yourself into On the Come Up.
Right.
On behalf of Wilson Morales. Oh, did you had something else?
Big shout outs to DC Radio for celebrating their 5th anniversary last week. So congratulations to DC Radio.
Yeah, and we should have had Wilson Morales come down for that, but he didn't come. So on behalf of everybody on the phone and on our show today, thank you guys. We will see you guys on the other side. Wilson, go make your phone calls, man. We will talk later.
All right. Thank you. Take care, folks.